Day 35 Notes, Financial Algebra. Today we're going to move into something new on our independent living section of the class. In this video we're going to talk a little bit about the vocabularies associated with renting an apartment or renting a home. And we'll also look at a few examples of what it takes to determine whether you can afford rent or how to determine what appropriate rent for an area might be. First things first, if you find yourself renting in the future rather than buying a place to live, you're going to hear these first two phrases quite a lot, tenant and landlord. Now, when you rent an apartment or a home, you are the tenant, and the owner of the apartment or home is the landlord. So sometimes we say that the tenant is the person or persons paying the rent, whereas the landlord is the person or persons collecting rent. I use the plural word of the form here in tenant because you may be living with a roommate and sharing your portion of the rent. And in the case of the landlord, sometimes the property owner themselves don't get involved with the business side of things, and they hire someone else to actually collect the rent or do the repairs on the property. Now, when you're looking for a place on your own, you might see ads in the newspaper or online that show the apartment comes furnished or it comes unfurnished. And the difference here means that a furnished apartment comes with all kinds of furniture with it. Now, furniture could be beds for a bedroom, or end tables, or couches, or chairs, or dining room table, or anything else that's usually included in a home, or what you would see as furniture in a home. But it also includes all other appliances in the home as well. Refrigerator, stove, air conditioner, that sort of thing. All of these appliances would be included in a furnished apartment. Basically, it's a ready to move in space. All you have to do is bring your own stuff. As far as an unfurnished apartment goes, this is quite literally an empty space. Now, some unfurnished apartments do come with larger appliances in the kitchen, such as a stove or maybe a refrigerator or something like that. But essentially everything else is left empty. There's no furniture, no beds, no tables or chairs or anything like that. You have to provide everything. So as you can imagine, a furnished apartment is going to cost you a bit more to rent than an unfurnished apartment, and that's because all of the furniture has been provided to you already. You don't have to spend the money to buy or purchase your own furniture. Now, speaking of rent, the term that we use for the contract that acts as an agreement between the landlord and the tenant, we call that a lease. And you always sign a lease or lease agreement to describe the conditions of the rental period. And this is done before you even move in. So I'll summarize this by saying that this is the legal contract describing the conditions, describing the rental conditions. And when you sign a lease is more than just renting from month to month. A lease implies that there's going to be a commitment, a length of commitment for this rental. So a commitment of a certain length of time for this rental. And the nice thing about having a lease is that as long as you hold up your end of the agreement, you're essentially guaranteed a place to live for the length of time that you've agreed to. Now, if you're not holding up your end of the commitment, Or if the landlord is not holding up his or her end of the commitment, then you might be able to terminate the lease. Now, when it's you as the tenant that's not holding up your end of the agreement, if you're at fault for breaking the terms of the lease agreement, then you will be evicted or asked to leave the property. So really, eviction only happens when you violate the lease agreement, when the tenant, I should say, violates the lease agreement. So when the tenant violates the lease agreement. And there are many ways that you can violate a lease agreement. It all depends on what you agree to in your lease. But the most common one is by not paying rent or not paying rent on time. So if you don't pay your rent, you can be evicted. If you have too many noise complaints or noise violations, you can be evicted, because a lot of time the leases will say something like you can't have loud music playing, or you can't have loud parties or that sort of thing on the property. Any illegal activities are grounds for termination or eviction. No landlord that I know of would be okay with you performing any illegal activities in their property. Some landlords will evict you if you have pets in the apartment, if you agree to no pets and that sort of thing. But it's important to remember that no landlord can simply evict you just because they want you out of the property. That's what this lease agreement does. It protects you from that. So if you've heard stories of people just being kicked out because they didn't get along with the landlord, there's probably no real truth to that. And besides, if that were the case, then the tenant would have legal grounds to stand on to fight that eviction. Now, in our textbook, I found an interesting chart, and it's reminding us that every 10 years, when the United States conducts its census and it collects data, some additional information other than just population information is included. And this chart is one that's the product or the result of the census every 10 years. And what it shows is our average percent of income spent on rent over the years. So if we go as far back as 1950, we see that of a person or family's income, only 17.9% of their income was spent on their rent. And through the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, that number kept going up till we reached a high point of 26.4%. Then in the year 2000, it dropped just a little bit to 25.5%. Now, I don't have the current information for the 2010 census, but maybe that's something that we can look up online. So what I found interesting on this is that, if you were to take a salary of a person or a family, for example, let's say in 1950, a family was making $20,000 take-home pay. 17.9% of that is $298.33. So on average in 1950, a family was spending around $300 for rent. Now, if we fast forward to the year 2000, and you take a person who's making $20,000, they would be paying around $425 in rent. So there's quite a bit of difference between 1950 and the year 2000. Also, it's worth noting that in 1950, $20,000 went a lot farther, as opposed to $20,000 in the year 2000. But that information and inflation aside, there's no denying the fact that people are spending more relative to their income today to pay for rent than they did in the 1950s. To finish out this video, I'd like to look at two practice problems, this example number 1 and the check your understanding that goes along with it. Before we do problem or example number 1, I will point out here that we're going to use this 25% number that was illustrated in the year 2000. We're just going to use the whole number 25%, and we're going to say that a person would spend 25% of their take-home pay rather than 25% of their total income. Because if you recall, 25% of take-home pay is the amount of money you have after you've paid your taxes, after taxes have been withheld from your paycheck. So of the money you get to take home from your job, we're going to use that to pay for rent. So that's just a little backstory that we're going to use for this example. So in this scenario, Alex makes $61,992 per year, and if he makes that kind of money, 25% of it goes to his federal and state taxes. So he doesn't get to see any of it. 25% right off the bat goes to taxes. So after we calculate taxes and after we take that money away, we have what's left, the take-home pay. And he'd like to find an apartment to rent. So we're going to estimate how much he can afford to pay for rent each month if he agrees that 25% of his take-home pay is what he'll use for rent. Then we will determine how much money he will have each year after taxes and rent are paid. Because after the taxes and rent are paid, the money that's left over can be used to buy other things like food and pay for his bills and entertainment and that sort of thing. So let's start with the taxes first off. Now I'm doing my work off to the side of my screen here. You may want a scrap sheet of paper now because I know the printout is a bit tight. For taxes, Alex makes $61,992 per year and spends or loses, depending on how you look at this, 25% of his income goes straight to taxes. Now I've got a calculator off the side of the screen, and I see that 25% of $61,992 is $15,498. So right away he spends that kind of money on his taxes, and he doesn't get to spend that at all. It goes straight to the government. So what that means is that his $61,992 salary, when deducted by $15,498 for taxes, leaves him with only $46,494 for take-home pay. Using this number, we can now calculate what Alex can afford in rent. So his take-home pay, the actual cash that he gets to spend on stuff in his life, is $46,494. And again, we agree to pay 25% of that number on rent. And 25% of $46,494 is $11,623.50. This is the total amount that he can spend on rent per year, because we're dealing with an annual income at this point. To determine monthly payment, we will divide this value by 12, so $11,623.50 divided by 12 appears to be $968.63. So almost $1,000 per month for rent for Alex. So this is a good answer for the first question in this problem. How much can Alex afford to pay for rent each month? Well, close to $1,000, $968.63. As far as how much money he has left over after taxes and rent are paid, well, each year he earns $61,992 at his job. He has to pay $15,498 in taxes. So let me label this stuff here. This is gross pay, the amount of pay that you earn before taxes are taken out. So gross pay is $61,000, taxes are around $15,000, and rent we're going to spend, or he's going to spend, $11,623.50. So after those two expenses are deducted from his gross income, that means he's left with about $34,870.50 to spend and save throughout the year. And this comes out to, when divided by 12, to $2,905 per month. So this is the actual cash that he can spend on things that he needs each month, in addition to a place to stay. So gasoline for the car, food for the table, that sort of thing. He has just under $3,000 at his disposal each and every month. So I'm starting to realize that the video in this series is getting pretty long, so I'm not actually going to work through the check your understanding. I'm not going to walk you through this one, but I do think you should be able to practice this problem on your own. So in a technique similar to the work that I was doing off to the side here, I want you to consider whether or not Bethany can pay $1,800 per month for rent. Now in her case, she has a gross income of $3,840 each month, but she loses 24% of that directly to federal and state taxes, and she also spends 15% of that right away on her student loan. Also 15% of her gross. So all of these percentages are calculated based on this gross income. But she also pays 15% of her gross income to pay towards her credit card balance. If she pays for nothing else, will she have $1,800 per month to spend on her rent? And if so, is there any room left over for anything else that she would need to spend money on? Either putting money into a savings account or buying groceries for the house or anything like that. Is that possible when she's looking to rent a place for $1,800? So I'll let you work on that, and we'll continue this discussion next time I see you in class.